Welcome to Section 2 of Part 3 of the training course on the demographic evaluation of age and sex data. In Part 3, in the first section, we covered Beer's interpolation and offered an exposition of how this particular approach might be used to derive single-year estimates from grouped 5-year data. In this video, Section 2 of Part 3, we're going to conduct an evaluation of data on ages of mothers giving birth and show how we can use the results from a civil registration system, a survey, or a census in comparison with data from the UNWPP, which has been subjected to Beer's interpolation, to allow us to better understand the reporting of ages of mothers giving birth in your data. When looking at data on ages of mothers giving birth, there are three possible sources. The first is civil registration data. The WHO recommends that the age of the mother at the time of the birth is captured during the civil registration of births. Demographic and Health Survey, as well as mixed data, as well as perhaps other surveys, routinely collect full birth histories, which would allow you to calculate the age of the mother at the birth of any given child. And so these data also might be able to be used in this context. Finally, in censuses, often a question is asked on the number of the births in the last year, and those would be classified by the age of the mother at the time of the census. However, using data from a census is a little more intricate, as there are technical issues associated with the reference period relative to the date to which the mother's age refers. And we're just going to take a very brief diversion into explaining what those issues are. The issue with census data relating to ages of mothers giving birth is this, that the questions are asked about the number of births, or simply, was there a birth, yes or no, in the year before the census. The date of the child's birth is seldom asked, even if the date of mother's birth is known and is available to you. In general, then, we usually have to assume that any reported births occurred on average 6 months before the census date, that is, halfway through the reference period of the year before the census. However, if the mother's own date of birth is not provided, her age is recorded as that being at the census date, not at the putative date of the child's birth, meaning that, on average, mothers are 6 months younger at the time of the birth of a child than they are reported to be at the time of the census. This problem is material, especially at the extremes of the age range of childbearing. And this is particularly relevant when one only has the age of the mother at the time of the census. Think, for example, of a woman reported to be age 17 last birthday at the time of the census. If they're 17 last birthday, they'll be aged somewhere between 17 to 18 at the time of the census, or on average, approximately 17 and a half. But those self-same women would be 6 months younger, in other words, on average age 17, at the time any child was born. At the extreme ages of the range of childbearing, those half-year differences can make a material difference to your estimates of fertility. And while the error can be corrected for in the derivation of fertility rates, using, for example, a relational Gompertz model, it is much harder to adjust the numerator alone. If you have been given mother's date of birth, the age of the mother at the time of the child's birth, still assumed on average 6 months earlier, if information on the exact date of the child's birth is not available, the mother's age at the time of the birth of that child should then be derived directly. In terms of the tabulations required to perform an evaluation of the age data of mothers giving birth, from civil registration and survey data, what you would require is a tabulation covering the births registered in a given calendar year or given calendar years by the age of the mother at the time of the birth. Ideally, those births should be adjusted for late registration, as described in the recent Guidelines for Estimating Completeness of Civil Registration of Vital Events, produced by ESCAP. The PDF version of these slides has a hyperlink to that document. You would then group the ages of mother at birth into conventional 5-year age groups, 15 to 19, 20 to 24, up to 45 to 49. For the purposes of this evaluation and these investigations, we're going to ignore births to mothers aged less than 15 or older than 50. The numbers at those age ranges is both small and subject to substantial variation. Furthermore, there's no way of deriving a counterfactual comparator from the available UNWPP data outside of the age range of 15 to 49. If one's working with census data, you would want a tabulation of births in the year before the census by the age of the mother, and preferably by the age of the mother at the time of the birth, if that is available and can be calculated. To give you an idea of what the data tabulation would look like, here's some sample data from South Africa's vital registration system. In each column, it shows the age of the mother at the time of the birth, running from 15 to 19, up to 45 to 49. And in each row, the number of births in each calendar year. As I noted earlier, births at the extreme end of the age range, certainly after 45, are much lower than the number of births aged 40 to 44. In terms of establishing some counterfactual data to compare those data with, you might use any population projection output, for example, Spectrum, a suite of population projection software in widespread use, and which often is parameterized and is generically parameterized to reproduce the estimates from the UNWPP. Or you might use internally or nationally produced population projections. But any of those would need to be able to produce a counterfactual estimate of the number of births by age group of mother by calendar year. In this training workshop, however, our recommendation is to make use of the most current national level projections produced by the UN Population Division, the UN World Population Prospects, or UNWPP. While for most purposes, those projections are regarded as something of a gold standard for national level comparisons, there are some limitations. First, the UNWPP does not provide projections at a subnational level, so information at a provincial or a district level is not going to be available. Secondly, we will need to be able to manipulate the available output produced by the UNWPP and made available on their website to be able to produce a counterfactual estimate of the number of births by age group of mother for any given calendar year. And that is what we will be looking at now. The published data from the UNWPP do not directly lend themselves for use as a counterfactual source of data. Yes, there is available a tabulation of births by age of mother, as per the hyperlink on this screen, but those data are published only for 5-year calendar year aggregates from mid-1950 to mid-1955, mid-1955 to mid-1960, and so on. You might think one could apply Beer's interpolation to this series to derive annual estimates of mother's age at giving birth for single calendar years, and then to interpolate each annual estimate to provide an estimate of births by age of mother in each calendar year. But the availability of other tabulations in the UNWPP makes a more refined approach possible. In particular, we're going to make use of the published numbers of women at mid-year of each calendar year by single years of age, which is a standard output from the UNWPP, and we'll use that in conjunction with the published schedules of age-specific fertility rates for 5-year calendar year periods and 5-year age groups. In summary, then, the recommended approach is that we will be applying Beer's interpolation to the UNWPP ASFRs, the age-specific fertility rates, published in 5 calendar year periods to derive annual age-specific fertility rates by the age group of the mother. We do this not least of all because fertility rates change only slowly and are not affected by population momentum. However, the resulting fertility rates derived from that Beers interpolation will apply from the middle of one calendar year to the middle of the next calendar year. And so we'll have to then linearly interpolate to get calendar year specific, age specific fertility rates. We will then take those calendar year specific, age specific fertility rates, which on average can be regarded to be applicable at the middle of every calendar year, to the UNWPP annual mid-year estimates of the number of women by age group. And if we multiply those two quantities together, we'll get the number of births in that year by age group. However, the UNWPP also provides an estimate of the total number of births in every calendar year. And so we will take the total of the births estimated from the interpolation procedures and rescale it to provide an estimate of the total annual number of births, which is then consistent with the UNWPP estimates of the total annual number of births in any given calendar year. All of that is quite demanding, and so the preceding steps have been automated in a spreadsheet that accompanies this workshop and is available on the workshop drive containing these videos, the PDFs, as well as the spreadsheets. The automated spreadsheet covers all countries covered by the UNWPP and will work for all calendar years from 2000 to 2028. I'm now going to demonstrate how to use that spreadsheet, in other words, to derive an estimate of the number of births in every calendar year by age group of mother from the UNWPP data using that spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet's name is DTW, standing for Demographic Training Workshop, _Beers, UNWPP.xlsx. The spreadsheet is now visible to you on the screen. What we are going to be doing is the first thing is to select the country which we are interested in drawing a counterfactual for. In my case, it will be South Africa, but in this drop-down box is a list of all the countries for which the UNWPP provides data. These green cells over here, beginning at cell B6 of the spreadsheet, look up the values of the age-specific fertility rates per 1,000 women from the UNWPP for each of those 5-year periods from mid-1995 to mid-2000, mid-2000 to mid-2005, and ending at mid-2025 to mid-2030. The spreadsheet also provides the implied total fertility rate in each of those 5 periods as a quick way of checking that the results are indeed relevant and useful for your own country. In order to apply the Beers interpolation, the first thing that we do is we are going to transpose the original matrix looked up from the UNWPP data so that the calendar years run across the columns and the age groups run down the rows. And this is done by means of using a transpose formula in the spreadsheet. What we then do is that we then apply Beers interpolation using the coefficients described in section 3 of part 1, that is the immediately preceding video to this one. We apply those Beers coefficients to these estimates of the age-specific fertility rates in order to provide a sequence of fertility rates by single year, running from mid-July of the 1st of July one year to the 30th of June the following, for each age group of the mothers. And if you look at the formulae here, it shows you that we again deploy the sum product function of the Beers coefficients, which is a hidden sheet in this workbook, to the estimate of the number of, to the age-specific fertility rates in a given age group. Having done that, because the derived age-specific fertility rates from the Beers interpolation still run from the 1st of July of one year to the 30th of June the following, we are going to derive the age-specific fertility rates on a calendar year basis by straightforward linear interpolation between the various estimates produced on the fertility rates derived from the Beer's interpolation. With the age-specific fertility rates on a calendar year basis, which would now apply on average to the middle of each of those calendar years, we can apply those age-specific fertility rates to the estimates of the number of women in each of the 5-year age groups derived from the UNWPP, centered on the middle of each calendar year. By cross-multiplying the age-specific fertility rates in each age group in a given calendar year with the total number of women in each age group in that calendar year, we can derive in this column AW an expected number of births implied by the number of women and the age-specific fertility rates we have derived. However, the UNWPP also provides a direct estimate of their estimate of the number of births in any given calendar year. And while these estimates are indeed incredibly similar to each other, they do differ somewhat. And so what we will be doing is rescaling the estimates of the total number of births so as to match that produced by the UNWPP. In column X of the spreadsheet, we simply provide a measure of the error between the expected number of births and the WPP births. And we can see that this error, while variable, is seldom approaching 1%. So the errors are generally fairly small, but it's nonetheless important to take them into account, to rescale them, to match the UNWP estimates. This is done in the results section of the UNWPP workbook. It takes the results of the age-specific fertility rates by calendar year and the number of women at the middle of each calendar year and rescales the implied number of births so as to match that produced by the UNWPP using a simple scaling formula. But what we have here is then a sequence of the number of births by age of mother applicable at the middle of each calendar year by the age group of the mother derived from the UNWP data. A graph is provided so you can examine the time trend over time of the number of births by age group of mothers, and one can look at that and say and ask whether it is indeed a fair representation of the fertility trends and the number of births by age in that country. Having prepared both the source and the counterfactual data, one can then set about drawing comparisons between the results. However, and this is important to note, if your source data come from a survey or are not nationally representative in scale, in other words, that the aggregate number of births implied by your survey data are not actually a fair estimate of the national number of births, which is what you'll be comparing with using the UNWPP data, you'll have to compare the proportional distribution of mothers' age at birth in the survey with the proportional distribution of mothers' age at birth estimated from the UNWPP data. In order to draw the comparisons between one's data from source and the counterfactual data, you're really only limited by the data you have available to you. Here, I note that data from a census will be much more sparse than data from a survey or vital registration data, because you will only have data on births in the year before the census and only have one calendar year's worth of data. You're also really only limited by your imagination, by the kinds of investigations which you might want to conduct and the comparisons which you might want to draw between the source data and the counterfactual data. But to help you get started, there are some useful starting points. For example, for a given year, in a given age group, how do the total number of births line up? And that's an investigation worth pursuing. We'd also want to check how the proportional distribution of ages of mothers at birth agree between your source data and your counterfactual data. Implicit in all of this work involving source and counterfactual data is that one might be able to derive estimates of completeness of birth registrations by age group in a single year, or for any given range of years. Or you might want to look at the trends in completeness of birth registration by age group over time. So what I'm going to show now is a spreadsheet which I have produced, which is designed to produce estimates and comparisons of the births by age of mother using vital registration data from South Africa and the data estimated from the UNWPP. This spreadsheet is much less automated than the previous one, not least of all because, as I said, the nature and scope of your investigations is going to be constrained by the data you have available to you, as well as the precise and particular questions which you want to investigate. Here, in this first panel with green cells, are the data from the South African Vital Registration System by calendar year. So this shows, for example, that in the year 2000, amongst women aged 15 to 19, there were 117,101 births registered to women in that age group. The second panel of the spreadsheet is the data just derived from the UNWPP. That number, 171,042 births to women aged 15 to 19 in the year 2000, has been pasted from the DTW Beers UNWPP spreadsheet for the correct year, for year 2000. And the data have been pasted from 2000 up to 2017, because that's the only data which we have available from South Africa. The first thing we are going to do, as a matter of course, is we're going to derive the proportional age distributions for both our vital registration data, our source data, as well as from the UNWPP data. The proportional distributions simply say, out of the total number of births, what proportion of births occurred to women in a particular age group. So we can see here, for example, that in the year 2000, that about 13% of the 904,196 births registered in 2000 were registered to mothers who were aged 15 to 19 at the time of the birth. And we can check that the total of those proportional distributions for each calendar year is 1. We do the same exercise from the data derived from the UNWPP. The UNWPP estimated in the year 2000 approximately 1.026 million births, of which 171,000 were estimated to have occurred amongst women 15 to 19 in that calendar year, meaning that in aggregate, about 16.7% of all births, according to the UNWPP estimates, in the year 2000 occurred to women aged 15 to 19. What we can then do is we can say, for a given calendar year, what are our observed distributions from our source data, the distribution of births from the UNWPP data. Note that I've put the UNWPP there in quote marks because these are not official UNWPP estimates, but rather those derived using the Beers interpolation. Also included in this table here are the observed numbers of births in that calendar year. Here I've chosen the year 2014 by age group of mothers and the equivalent numbers implied by the UNWPP estimates. Dividing the observed numbers by the UNWPP numbers for every age group will give us an estimate of the completeness of the birth registrations in that year for any given age group. Further down, I have produced some plots of births by the age of mother. That's the total number of births by age of the mother from the observed or source data, as well as from the UNWPP data, and a comparison of the age distribution of births, again, from the source data and from the UNWPP data, and finally, an estimate of the completeness of birth registration by age. And I will be referring to those shortly. It is possible here, just to show, that one might be able to look at the data for another year. Just by simply entering the year 2010 there, one can compare again the number of births and the age distribution of births. What I would suggest you do is you work through this spreadsheet and modify it to your own purposes. It should provide a useful starting point for your investigations. So if we return now to the slides and look at those results, here we have that graph for South Africa in 2014, as I derived in the preceding spreadsheet. We can see that in aggregate, the UNWPP numbers are somewhat higher than the observed numbers of births by age of mothers. However, when we look at the age distribution of births, in other words, ignoring the effects of the differential registration of births, we can see that the age distribution of births implied by the UNWPP distribution and that from our source data are highly similar, with only one marked difference in the 25 to 29 age group, where the UNWPP estimate of the proportion of births occurring to women aged 25 to 29 is some 3 or 4% higher than it is in our source data. The plot of the completeness of birth registration by age for 2014 suggests that across most ages, certainly up to age 40 to 44, the completeness of birth registration was somewhere of the order of just under 90%, which is broadly congruent with our own estimates of the completeness of birth registration in South Africa in 2014. The somewhat lower implied completeness at age 25 to 29 is in part due to the assumption and the implication of the UNWPP data that fertility amongst women 25 to 29 was somewhat higher than implied by our source data. It's also worth noting the apparently alarmingly low completeness of birth registration amongst births of women aged 45 to 49 in comparison between the source data and the UNWPP data. Firstly, one must always remember that even though this number appears to be very low, and it is, it refers to a rather small number of births, certainly under 10,000 births in the country, either according to the UNWPP or the source data. What might be underpinning this, of course, is that the UNWPP assumes much greater fertility amongst women 45 to 49 than is the case, and that would be something to be investigated further. In general, when drawing these comparisons and when confronted by a discrepancy between two estimates, you have to remember that either or both estimates may be the source of the disagreement. Consequently, the untangling of those discrepancies requires further work and investigation as to what might explain them. And here you should be looking at making use of other data. Maybe there's a recent demographic and health survey which might provide some insight into the age distribution of births in your country. And that might point, if it's consistent with the source data, to the error lying with the UNWPP estimates. Alternatively, if those estimates from a survey, a DHS, for example, conform more readily to those in the UNWPP, that would point to particular age-related issues with the registration of births in the country. As a reminder, at the end of every video, I please ask that if you've got any questions or queries, comments on this material, please email me, thomasmoultrie@un.org, and copy it to ESCAP-CRVS@un.org. I will do my best to answer the questions, either by return of email or in the first plenary session where we join each other on the 27th of May, 2022. I look forward to meeting you then, and until then, thank you very much.